What's going on, folks? This is Ready, Set, Homestead, where the only fluff is the feathers. And today we're going to talk about winterizing your chicken coops. A few things that you need to know when it comes to winterizing your coops. Hey, how y'all doing? The first thing I want to start with is something that you really wouldn't think about, and that's you. You need to make sure before your coops are winterized that you're winterized. Make sure that you have good warm weather gear. So in my area, we live in southern Louisiana, our temperatures will get down into the 20s and 30s. And with the humidity being as high as it is, those temperatures do feel a little bit colder than it does in a dry climate. However, you need to make sure that you have all the things that you need to have, because before you can take care of them, you gotta make sure you take care of yourself. Here's some of the things that I do to make sure that I am able to care for my birds in the best way possible. Get yourself a warm hat. So it's great to have a sweater, a good jacket, something that you're able to move in that's not going to be restrictive of your activities. And of course, you need some water resistant boots. Water resistance is really going to help you out, especially if they're insulated, if you have an environment in which you get a lot of snow. Because when you're taking care of these animals during the wintertime, the last thing you want is wet feet. Wet feet are going to make you a lot colder, a lot faster, and it's going to prevent you from being able to give them the best care that you can. Make sure you got some gloves. Gloves are going to be great when that temperature gets a lot colder. You can make sure that when you're working on things, whether it be wood, metal, caging, water, things like that, that your hands aren't getting cold. Because when your hands get cold and they start tightening up, again, it's going to make it a lot more difficult to be able to do things that you need to do to keep your birds safe. Something like this. These are hand warmers. These are made by Ocoopa. I will leave a link down in the description below. You can get these on Amazon, but it's pretty cool. You just hold the button right here, and it's going to turn the device on. Now there's 3 different settings. We have a low, we have a medium, and we have a high. What these are going to do is these are going to heat up. These specific ones are magnetic, so they stick together, but you can toss these inside your hoodie, leave them on. I'm going to turn this on low, leave them on, step inside. And so all you have to do when your hands are getting cold is stick your hands inside your hoodie. It's a quick way to warm up your hands without having to go inside. To make things easy for you, in order to easily remember what you need to do when it comes to winterizing, I've created an acronym. This acronym is going to be good to remember all the things that you need to do to help protect your poultry, your turkeys, and many other livestock animals on your homestead or farm when it comes to the winter. And this acronym is WINTER, W-I-N-T-E-R. Now the W stands for water. And what I mean by water is you want to make sure that you always have a clean water source on a daily basis. Again, where I live in southern Louisiana, we don't get below freezing too often. We will have probably in this entire winter season about 4 weeks of below freezing temperatures. Water freezes at 32 degrees. It doesn't matter if that water is moving or not. Now, moving water has a lot more friction, so it does take a little bit longer for that water to get to that temperature. But once it gets to 32 degrees, it's gonna freeze. The best way to make sure that your water stays liquid and unfrozen is to change it out frequently and to change it out every single day. Now, if you're like me and a lot of other people, you've kind of set up your farm to be as self-sufficient as possible. I like to use the 5-gallon waterers. But when it comes to the wintertime, this is extremely important to do. I do recommend having at least 1 extra waterer, that if you do have a situation in which it freezes, you don't have to sit there and try and thaw it out to get them the fresh water that they need. You can just grab the empty one, fill it up, let the other one thaw, empty it out, however you want to do that, and then you can use the fresh water to bring it back in for them for the rest of the day. Water is crucial to the survival of any animal. So check on them every single day. By changing out their water every single day, even though you might only do it once every 3 days or 4 days or even once a week, normal circumstances, checking on them every day gives you the ability to see any problems before they may arise. Now, if you do live in a climate that gets very cold, you get a lot of snow and things like that, there are warmers that you can purchase. I'll leave them down in the description below. One like this for your waters. Warming pads, you can actually get warming buckets themselves, or you can get the inserts that will stay heated and prevent the water from freezing. But just like anything that's electric that heats, you need to make sure that you be careful from electrical and fire hazards using those products. My recommendation is always going to be to check on the water frequently and make sure that it's fresh. So the W in our winter acronym is water. The I is going to be intake. Intake is their fuel source, which is their food. Now, depending on what you already feed your chickens, you may or may not need to alter that. But here's a few things that you can do. Turkey's internal temperature is usually between about 105 and 107 throughout the day. Chicken is usually about 104 to 106. So they're very similar when it comes to their body temperatures. Now, both chickens and turkeys are able to regulate their temperature very, very well. This is why in the past I've talked about not having to heat your coops, because their feathers, whenever they get cold, you'll see them kind of lift up. And what they do is they lift up and they'll seal air. So they'll lift up, puff themselves up, and kind of hold it. And what they do is they seal air inside their feathers. Their body then increases the temperature of that air, and they use the air that they sealed and raise themselves to keep themselves warm. Only way they can do this is if they have proper nutrition. What does that mean? What do you need to make sure that they have the proper nutrition in order for them to keep themselves warm? Protein. So I have two different feed types here along with two different additives. This over here is a 19% protein source. This crumble right here is a 22%. And these black soldier flies from Grubterra are 34%. Protein is going to be one of the most important things that your birds need to stay warm in the winter. Protein is a sustainable fuel source. So the protein goes into the muscles will work everything that they need. But if you've been raising chickens and studying for any period of time, you know that birds use protein to lay eggs, which means in the wintertime, you are going to have a decreased production in eggs because the protein they normally use to produce those eggs is going to be reserved and used for survival. Now, if you're unsure what kind of feed source you should use for your birds, best recommendations is to go to your local feed store. I'm not talking about a big box. Big box stores sell all this stuff. I'm talking about find a local feed store. Talk to the managers. Toys are great, but the managers are going to have more information. Because if you go to a local feed store, chances are they probably have a couple companies that have given them seminars on what different types of feeds to use. One feed that I really like, which is going to be that 19%, is going to be Kalmbach Hen House Reserve. Now, I'm not sponsored by Kalmbach. Kalmbach has never given me anything, but I have taken seminars with Kalmbach, and I've taken Winterize seminars with Kalmbach. And for me personally, I'm a Kalmbach guy. Unless my local feed store is closed, that's pretty much exclusively the feed that I'm going to use for any of my birds. If you don't have access or you don't want to change out their feed, that's perfectly fine too. But you can use something like the soldier fly larva. Of course, this is Grubterra. You have mealworms, you have soldier fly. Soldier fly is going to have a higher content of mealworms. The reason I like Grubterra is because they're sustainable. They actually take a lot of the waste from grocery stores and farmers and things like that, and they use that to feed the black soldier flies in order to get all these larvae. So very sustainable company, but you can use these as a supplement to help increase that protein. It is important though, if you're using a protein supplement, it should not exceed 10%, really less than 10% of their feed on a daily basis. Just give them a handful every other day or every couple days to boost up that protein. Something else I like to keep in stock is cracked corn. Now, the cracked corn, if you look inside here, you can see I got bugs, and I love bugs in my cracked corn. Cracked corn is great for a couple reasons. Number one, the turkeys love it. Number two, it's cheap. Corn is very cheap. You can get about 50 pounds of cracked corn for anywhere between $10 and $13. Why would I give cracked corn? Well, cracked corn is very, very high in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is an energy source. A lot of people will actually use cracked corn almost exclusively throughout the wintertime. I don't recommend using it exclusively because they do need the crude fats, they need the proteins, they need the other vitamins and minerals and things of that nature, but it's a great boost for energy and heat needs. So if you have one of those days where you're in the 40s and 50s or 30s, and then the next day it drops 20 degrees pretty drastically, corn is a very good temporary boost of energy. So you can go ahead and give them that corn, let their bodies adjust to the drastic change in temperature as their natural protein intake increases as well. Typically going to see an increase in consumption of feed in the wintertime, despite a decrease in production of eggs. The N in our winter acronym for nesting. Now, nesting is going to encompass a few things. It's going to encompass your bedding source. So right here, I'm actually using pine pellets. Now, the pine pellets you can purchase at your big box, places like Tractor Supply. In my local area, it's $6.39 for a 40-pound bag of it. And it starts as a pellet, but as the birds walk on it, it turns into this shaving right here. It's a great moisture absorber for both their feces, their urine, as well as rain, snow, things like that. But I also like to keep in stock some pine shavings. Now, a deep litter method is one of the most popular methods that people use when it comes to the winter time, because you can just add stuff to it and it'll break down, and it's great for compost come springtime starting your garden. My coop will be transitioned eventually to river sand. The river sand is also a great moisture absorber, but it's always good to have something like this where you can throw it in there if you do have a big moisture source. If you find you have a leak in your roofing, things like that, it's going to help absorb that up. But you want to make sure that they have plenty of nesting. You want to make sure that that bedding is dry. Wet bedding can create ammonia. Ammonia is very dangerous to both your birds as well as yourself. In addition to creating, diseases like bumblefoot and just growth of bacteria in general, you want to keep your bedding as dry as possible. Now, part of the nesting also is going to include roosting space. Now, you want to make sure that you have enough roosting space for all of your chickens. If you free range during the winter time or during the summertime, that's great, but you want to make sure you have enough roosting space for all of your birds. Remember that heat rises, so the coldest place of your coop is going to be on the ground. You don't want your birds to have to sleep on the ground in the coldest temperature. Have them raised up. Birds, they're going to snuggle, so they're all going to get close together. We recommend having 18 to 24 inches of space per bird in your coop. During the wintertime, they're going to be using probably half of that because they're going to snuggle together for warmth. The T in our winter acronym stands for tidy. What this means is keep the space clean. If you're using a deep litter method, you want to make sure that it's clean. You don't want a lot of water sources, because if the birds get wet, they're going to get cold. And they don't like that. Make sure you're keeping the area tidy. Now, again, I do recommend a deep litter method of some sorts inside your coop, because your chickens are going to be spending more time inside their coop typically than they are inside their run. So what this means is if you have a coop, that's designed where the chicken... What this means is if you have a coop that's designed where you normally have to clean it out on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, scooping everything out, you're gonna have to do that a little bit more often in the winter time, because they're spending more time inside of it. Spending more time inside the coop means there's gonna be a lot more feces, there's gonna be a lot more urine. You might wanna consider actually removing a water source if you have the ability to put it inside of a run. Because with more chickens inside of a smaller space, you have a higher likelihood that water is gonna spill. Isn't that right? The E in our winter acronym stands for enrichment. What this means, don't lock your birds up for the entire winter. They're animals, and just like all animals, they need exercise, they need activity. You can do things like purchasing a block so that they can peck at the block, get extra nutrients and that extra protein that we talked about earlier in the intake, but give them the ability to move around. Now, the setup of my coops, they have the roosting and they have their enrichment. Now, you can purchase tools, you can purchase toys, things like that allow them to have a little bit more fun. But when it comes to chickens and turkeys, you have to make sure that they have the ability to move around. Activity is good for them. They're animals, so they do have natural instincts. If they're cold, they're gonna go to where it's warm. They're gonna go back inside the coop. But give them the ability to either move around inside of a run or even free range if you normally free range. If you have really bad temperatures and you're worried about something happening to them when they're free ranging, just let them out a couple hours before nightfall. If that nightfall happens, they're going to go back in and they're not going to wander as far as they normally would if they had all day to roam around. But they need the ability to move around, to scratch around. You can get extra scratch drains. When I give them corn, I like to sprinkle the corn out on the actual coop itself so that they're actually moving around, they're pecking, they're becoming active, because they need to have that activity. They need to keep moving. It's going to help them generate heat. And last but not least in our winter acronym is R. R stands for reinforce. That means reinforce your roofing and reinforce your walls. Ventilation is key, but you don't want drafts. What is the difference between ventilation and drafts? Drafts are uncontrolled sources in which air can get inside. See, I have my roosting bar right here, and I have a draft source. When wind comes through, it's gonna go right over the birds. Now, I have a little bit different of a situation because I do have a fence on the other side of this and a fence on the back. But we can still get air that's coming through these right here, creating a draft for the birds. Ventilation is a controlled source of airflow. Whether you have some ventilation low down, as well as up high. You can see something like this is perfect as ventilation. And this is something you should always have in your coop no matter what time of year. So you can always put across some hardware cloth to prevent predators like minks and things like that from coming through there. But when it comes to these low levels right here, getting you some foam is great. Now this is large gap foam. This is designed for gaps that are about an inch. And it's super easy to apply. Shake the can well. And you just go right along the gap. Voila. Another way you can reinforce your walls to prevent that there's no draft is putting up something like plywood. You can put the plywood across. I'll actually be putting plywood across this window here. And a good old-fashioned tarp. You're gonna get yourself a good heavy-duty tarp. I like to get the tarps that have the silver reflective on the inside and then a dark on the outside. So what I'll do is I'll do it just like this. Dark is on the outside, it absorbs the heat, and it keeps all the heat reflected on the inside. Of course, part of reinforcing isn't just about the draft and ventilation, it's also about predator protection. Your chickens are probably going to be inside more often, so make sure that they are very protected against predators. This is chicken wire. This will not stop a predator that is very determined to get it. Raccoons can stick their fingers in between here. They can grab chickens and turkeys and things like that. Foxes, dogs, all sorts of things can also rip this out. This is hardware cloth. Nothing's going to get inside of this if properly secured. There's more than one way to winterize your homestead, your farm, your coops, whatever it may be. But when it comes to winterizing, just remember the acronym WINTER. Water, intake, nesting, tidiness, enrichment, and reinforcement. Good luck this winter. If you learned something, make sure you like, follow, subscribe, share it with a friend, leave a comment down below. But this is Ready, Set, Homestead. Enjoy Homestead.